Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Braverman.
And I'm Ellen Selm.
Welcome to our podcast, Stories from the Earth,
where we explore mankind's relationship and connection with the natural world.
Today, we are going to be digging into the book Women Who Run with the Wolves. Woohoo! If you're watching on YouTube, we're both showing our copies. We are going to talk about Myths and Stories of the Wild Woman Archetype by Clarissa Pinkola Estes.
She is an American poet and Jungian-influenced psychoanalyst and post-trauma specialist who is raised in a now nearly vanished oral and ethnic tradition. She is a first-generation American who grew up in a rural village, population 600, near the Great Lakes. This is all biography from her website. Dr. Estes is a lifelong activist in service of the voiceless and post-trauma recovery specialist and psychoanalyst of 48 clinical years in practice with persons traumatized by war, exile, torture, and as a journalist covering stories of human suffering and hope. She is, and forgive me if I do not pronounce this correctly, but she is Mestiza Latina, Native American, Mexica Spanish. She grew up in the now vanished oral tradition of her war-torn immigrant refugee family who could not read or write and for whom English was their third language, overlaying their ancient native tongue. As an older child, she was adopted into the family of majority Magyar and minority Dano Swabian tribal people. They were wise in the ways of nature, planting, animals, and making everything from scratch, from shoes to songs. Thus she was raised, immersed in the oral tradition of old mythos and stories, songs and chants, dances, and ancient healing ways. Her writing is deeply influenced by her family people, who were hands-on farmers, shepherds, hopsmeisters, wheelwrights, weavers, orchardists, tailors, cabinet makers, lace makers, knitters, horsemen and women from their old countries. Her works have been translated and published into 37 different languages, and this book, Women Who Run with Wolves, which is arguably her most famous, spent 144 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. I'm sure that's got to be some kind of a record. You can go to her website, clarissapinkola.estes.com, to read more about her amazing connections and her many accomplishments.
I was going to look up how many years 144 weeks was. I think there's 52 no, is that right? 52
weeks, yeah.
So 2.77. 2 years, 0.77. That's a while.
Plus, it's just amazing that it's been translated. I mean, it's, gone all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, I just really don't. I just remember always hearing about this book. And I was surprised that it was written in 1992.
Well, that's when our particular edition.
Oh, okay.
I think the original copyright in these, at least, says. Oh no, you're right. It's mentioning older copyrights related to some of the stories that she retells and shares within it. But the book itself was from the 90s, which sounds about right from when I remember first coming into my consciousness and hearing the title of it.
It just feels like it's been around forever for me, but of course I was in middles, almost going into high school in 92, so it's forever. Yeah. And actually, if I had heard about it kind of then, it did make almost sounds like an immediate impact, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So even to get
the title itself is pretty gripping.
Yeah. I mean, and also it's in gold. You could just bam. And then we were talking about the woodblock printing of the lady with the wolf.
The artwork's really cool.
Pretty amazing. So it's even though gold is not my favorite color, I still could. It's a very striking cover.
If you were to judge a book by it.
If you were, and there is a reason why they have different book covers. People kind of do judge a book a little bit by its cover. Okay, we'll get back on track now. That was your marketing section of the podcast. All right, so can you give us a brief summary of what this book is about for maybe people who are not familiar with it?
Yeah, so taken from the book jacket, within every woman there lives a powerful force filled with good instinct, passionate creativity, and ageless knowing. She is the wild woman who represents the instinctual nature of women. But she's an endangered species, for though the gifts of wildish nature belong to us at birth, society's attempt to civilize us, quote unquote, into rigid roles has muffled the deep, life-giving message of our own soul. In Women Who Run with Wolves, Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes unfolds rich intercultural myths, fairy tales, folk tales, and stories, many from her own traditions, in order to help women reconnect with this fierce, healthy, visionary attribute of this instinctual nature. Through the stories and commentary in this remarkable book, we retrieve, examine, love, and understand the wild woman and hold her against our deep psyches as one who is both magic and medicine. Dr. Estes has created a new lexicon for describing the female psyche, fertile and life-giving. It is a psychology of women in the truest sense and a knowing of the soul. And honestly, that's a pretty fair summation. I'd say it's not incorrect. However, in some ways, I think it can't even really do the work justice, because this is a monumental life's work, and it really shows throughout the book with the detail and the thought that she put into everything. I mean, to read this summary, it almost paints it into like a sparkly broad brush and makes it sound pretty and nice, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, it is, but it can't even scratch the surface of the raw nature of this giant tome of a book. The only way to begin grasping it is you gotta read it. It's hard to try and summarize it without sounding too woo-woo about it, I think. And while it does touch upon the liminal, almost mystical in some ways, it's also a really, really rooted and deep and kind of ancient core reality of the human experience. That's my addition to the summary there.
It's very dense.
That you were telling me that the audiobook got abridged.
Oh yeah. So if anyone out there knows an unabridged audio book, please let me know, because I was very disappointed. It's really a shame not to have the whole thing to be able to listen to it. And I like to listen, and I learn really well when I'm listening. I also have more time to listen to a book than to read a book right now. But yeah, it's just a shame, because like another book that I would say that is sort of similar but similar is Braiding Sweetgrass, and that book is very dense, just like this book, and it has a gorgeous audio book by the author. And so like I was hoping that this would be the same thing, but unfortunately I don't even like the lady narrating it. No offense to her, but I just didn't like how they did it. So if anyone knows of any non-abridged, why did you pick this book?
Well, for starters, it's amazingly kind of a perfect bridge for our show, being stories from the earth and trying to branch further into the story theme and ways in which they reflect our nature and the nature around us. This book is chock full of that, and I mean 500 jam-packed pages plus detailed endnotes and further reading suggestions list. My sister had an old copy that a friend had given her several years ago, and I don't even think she'd ever read it, or at least if she'd started, she didn't remember anything about it. She never finished it, and she decided to just pass it along to me. So I read it last year in the midst of the pandemic craziness, and because I had that kind of time on my hands, it was kind of like a therapy that I didn't even know I needed. I honestly could hardly put the book down. I mean, for as thick as it is, I read it in no time. And at the same time, I did have to set it down because I had to read it in like bursts and then walk away for a bit to really let it settle in and digest, because it just had so many whoa, wow, aha, kind of moments in reading it. And I just raved about it so much after finishing reading it to my sister that she was like, whoa, I guess I should have read that when I had it. So I returned the gift in kind and sent her a copy. And I've been delving a lot these past couple years into myth and storytelling and the power that can kind of lay therein with regards to expression of being a living being on this planet. And thus far I have yet to come across any other work remotely as huge, detailed, scholarly, gripping, reflective, and inspiring as this book. If that's not hyperbolic enough for you, I don't know what is. But seriously, it's in a category all its own, really.
So what did you like best about this book? What were some of the things that stood out to you?
A few things worth noting. She did do a wonderful job at taking old myths and legends that may have had female central characters in the plot and then really go into the history of where and how they could have been traced back so far that the meanings at the heart of the stories could be interpreted as lessons of feminine strength and knowing, versus in their history, they might have gotten twisted around due to religiosity or patriarchy, and at whatever point in time and where they were in the world that the stories traveled. And it kind of obscured the influence of the stories and kind of maybe enacted more of a conniving or untrustworthy or evil witch woman stereotype, or conversely, the dumb, helpless, naive, weak girl stereotype. So she digs in almost like an archaeologist would in uncovering the bones of things from the past and getting at the real bones of these old stories, and through that kind of reminding us of the deeper knowing and understanding and power that we can claim. She's very verbose and poetic with her writing style, which frankly renders her a woman after my own heart. And the breadth of the book is nothing to shake a stick at. That is to say, it had to be no small feat. It was clearly a labor of love, and that shows. She doesn't really cut corners. I appreciate that she clearly took so much time and brain power to make sure that the things were thought out and researched and filled in. And also, I don't think it's really highbrow in any way that makes it inaccessible to many people. I mean, clearly it's not, because she translated it into so many languages and sold it around the world, but it's probably one of the most widely traveled works in modern literature. I'd be willing to venture a guess.
So do you have a big book that you're going to write in your future, Ellen? Is that what you're saying?
It wouldn't be hard. Just
pre-order now. Ellen's book. Based on this podcast. No, just hey, baby. I found it as accessible as something like this could be.
Yes, that's a good summation. Yes. It is such its own thing. It can only be as accessible as something like it could be.
Yes, exactly. I remember the part, because one of the reasons I wanted the audio version is so I could reread it, because when was I in college? Like 20 plus years ago. One part in the audiobook, she's talking about Grimm's fairy tales and how they kind of cleaned up all the fairy tales, and that the Russian fairy tales were very kind of dirty and raunchy and sexy and all kinds of stuff. And I'm assuming the other fairy tales were. And I'm glad that I don't like that they did that, because I feel like we've lost things because they did that. If they had just sort of recounted them as they were, it might have been better. But I'm glad that she has. It sound like she's always talking about the tales.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The layout is kind of like she has her, chapter title point she's trying to make. She'll use sort of a wolf-themed metaphor in the title. Then she'll kind of like go into the psychoanalysis of what she's meaning by it. Then she'll tell a story that's like an old historic, folktale of some sort to illustrate the point she's making. And then she kind of goes through and dissects the story. After reading through the story, you kind of go back through and dissect part by part what points it could be translated as saying to have been making, like what lessons could be taken out of it, especially from a psychoanalysis point of view. So it's a pretty cool concept.
Which is great, because a lot of times when I hear like maybe a folk tale, just hear it, I feel like maybe I don't get it. I'm like, I need someone. I need that analysis afterwards. Like, it's like, okay, we read the story. Here's the discussion. But I think a lot of times you hear a story and then you don't get the discussion part because we don't do that. I don't know. Like,
a lot of cases in modern times, we're so far removed from those stories' origins. At least if we're talking about old folk tales like Grimm's Brothers and stuff, like we're so far removed that we either are just going to read it and go, huh? Or we're just going to read it as this sort of like surface level, like, oh, wasn't that a cute little story, and not really think to take it any further. But if you think about the history that like these, sure, stories were told as entertainment, but they get passed down not just for entertainment. They get passed down because there's some kind of nugget of meaning, nested inside of it. Her book does a good job at trying to kind of awaken the creative brain again to start seeing sort of the living myth around us,
It's like, usually we just pop on a Disney movie. Right? Like that's our folk tales. Even at the base level, I think we've lost that part of sort of it. It's like we lost. I think we still need the, the grannies or grandpas or whatever sitting around the campfire or sitting around the kitchen table. We still need those storytellers. We still need the mentors. And I think that.
So if you don't have a real one in your life, you got to find a good book substitute.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. A good book substitute. What did you like least about this book?
Well, I wish I would have read it sooner in my life. I mean, that's not really fault of the book, but the funny thing is I remember seeing it around my house at one point briefly as a kid. Like, I was probably 11 or 12. That sounds about right, given the time frame when this book came out. And I think somebody my mom worked with had like loaned it to her, and my mom was just so busy working in those days that I'm pretty positive she didn't ever actually sit down to read it. And I was always pulling books from my parents' bookshelf to read, and then I'd lay around on the couch and read all day long. And I would read things cover to cover, and I would read things that had been considered above my level. Perks of being a homeschooler, I could say. But I was also obsessed with wolves as a kid. So the image from the cover of the book and the name of the book always stuck with me, even though I had no idea back then what it was about. I'm kind of surprised, frankly, that I didn't just pick it up out of curiosity and start reading it there and then. But I think maybe because I knew it was just loaned from somebody else, like I felt like it wasn't my place to mess with it. That's my best guess from a hazy memory anyhow. But dang, I sure wish I would have read it back then because, yeah, I mean, there might have been some stuff in it that would have been over my head due to lack of life experience, but there's still so much more in it that I'm sure that I could have digested, and honestly, probably it would have helped me a lot. I mean, being the shy, introverted, homebody, gender neutral inclined kid that I was. More specifically, though, I guess that actually leads me to a complaint about the book, really the only complaint I have, if you could call it that. But even though women have needed and still need the kind of inspiration and exaltation and power reclamation that this book speaks of, even though it's extremely important for us, especially coming out of, so many years of oppression and from a patriarchal cultural norm, in some respects, reading it today in these times when there is increasingly more people openly questioning and speaking out about definitions of gender norms and gender identity, and recognition that male identifying people also struggle with cultural issues that are a fault of hardline patriarchy. So like, being discouraged from showing emotion, or something as simple as it being bad for a male to like the color pink or play with a doll or whatever. Like, the fact that a book like this has not been written with verbiage to reach an audience of all genders and even the non-gender identifying, that's kind of a shame, frankly. I mean, with some flexible, open-minded thinking, anybody could read the book and get something out of it. I mean, I really believe that. It's just focusing on elements within it that speak to the larger nature of human existence. And there's a plethora of that in there. In fact, I happily argue that there's really no reason why anyone and everyone shouldn't read the book, because I do think that there's important material in it, all gender aside. But at the end of the day, she did write it as a woman for women, and so her language throughout it is heavily aimed that way, and there's nothing wrong with that by any means. But it probably can and will and does, unfortunately, make the book feel a little less accessible for folks who could be thrown off by that kind of language. And then they might choose to pass over the book on account of that, and then they would miss out on all the little gold nuggets that are tucked in it,
Yeah, definitely. But I understand like what you're saying. I think that in some ways the book is a product of its time.
Yeah.
We weren't talking about gender
as much.
Even yes, and I think like it's just accelerating in the past couple of years, this whole thing like with trans and just everything is just sort of, it feels like it's just it's been here, but it's more
time has come
out in the open. Like, I mean, to the point where like I know several people who are trans, and
and that wouldn't have necessarily been as obvious maybe in 1992 or whatever.
No. I mean, like if we had gay people, they were way in the closet at my high school. So, and I remember one person who was an acquaintance, and he was very overweight. He seemed very kind of miserable. I think he went to some art school. I don't know. We ran into him at another like school event that wasn't at school. And he had like dropped a bunch of weight, looked very happy. But I think it was because he was just so far in the closet and so miserable because of not being able to be who he is. Anyway, that aside, so it's a good thing that we're talking about these things, and that they're becoming more in the open.
Yeah.
But I think that this book is important for women to have, and I think
that much still stands.
I think perhaps that what you're talking about is now we need another book.
Yep. Maybe that's what I'll write.
Maybe that's like.
There was one other thing that I am remembering. I was kind of like, about when I read the book, and it's not so much a complaint complaint is it kind of was surprising in a way. In a way, it was a little bit of a letdown, I guess. There is in her chapter 11 titled "Heat: Retrieving a Sacred Sexuality," and the reason is that for as detailed and thorough and arguably long-winded by comparison that the rest of the book is, it almost seems like her approach in that chapter was a bit more of an afterthought. And it's kind of strange to say that because it almost sticks out like a sore thumb compared to the rest of the book. It's like she knew the topic was important enough to need to be covered in a book like this because female sexuality has been one of the most maligned and oppressed things throughout our history. And yet, as major of an issue and point as that is, she really didn't unpack it very much. She didn't offer as much story or as much dissection of story to really unfold the topic as much as I would have thought she would based on how the rest of the book is. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of other books floating around out there that go on about that topic, so it's not like there isn't a way to get to further study it if one wants to. But I'm just pointing out that as lusciously full as the rest of the book is about all the other subject matter, it was just kind of strange that in this particularly intimate area, she didn't really get that intimate. I mean, she just didn't really, she didn't really seem to put as much time into it as she did the rest of the book, which I just thought was a little odd.
I wonder if she is thinking about writing a book, another book just specifically for it, or maybe.
I mean, I know she explores it more in some lectures and workshop series that she does. So
maybe it was just, I don't know. Maybe she felt like it wasn't. I don't know. I can't say that maybe she didn't feel like it wasn't important. That just seems odd, but yeah, that does kind of suck, and it would be. I think that we can't get enough. I think that it would have been very beneficial to have a big meaty chapter on that.
Yeah, and I think too because it's kind of like really nested into the heart of the book, so it's like. By the time you get to that chapter, you've read so many long chapters that you're like, wait a minute, what?
This was a short one.
That's all there is? Okay, well, on to the next thing.
Did she do any recommended reading for that?
Oh, she may have.
Okay.
The recommended reading list in the back of the book
really
is quite long.
So maybe she did. Maybe for some reason she wasn't able to. I mean, it does sound like she has knowledge, and since you said it was in her lectures, and it wasn't just sort of.
Maybe it was just something she hadn't explored as much in her own course of study in life at the point that she wrote the book, and she's just built on it later. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe she.
It doesn't take away from the book by any means. It just kind of stuck out to me because it was so drastically different from the rest of the book's approach, I should say.
Maybe this was all she could offer at the time. She hadn't, we don't learn everything at once. So maybe she's like, this one.
Like I said, she knew it was important enough to include something.
Yes,
so that's
good. Yes. I wanted to go back to when you were talking about how you had wished you had read the book sooner. I feel like I read the book too soon because I knew it was important. And then when I was in college, I was struggling with identity and how basically who was this thing called woman? Who was I? I knew a few archetypes or roles that women were sort of supposed to I don't know, the good girl, the bad girl, the tomboy, the whatever. And I'm like, well, that just doesn't do it for me. I was feeling like they didn't fit with who I felt I was. And so
you hoped you'd find it in that book.
Right. but I think that I could not, even though I've underlined everything and starred things and everything else, like I didn't know how to take it with me. I didn't know how to apply it to my life. I didn't know what it meant in my life because it felt like a separate thing. And I think it's just because, I don't know, maybe I wasn't ready, or maybe it was just because the ideas in this book are like, we've come so far away from them that, I think you need some more. Maybe I didn't have the life experience to bring it to where it needed to be to make more sense. So.
Well, I would say, that totally makes sense. Obviously, it's her writing. It's very much her own style and approach, and it's so specific in a way because of that it's, you gotta be in this sounds hokey to say, but it's like you're gonna have to be in the right place in your life to receive it.
Yeah.
And what's funny is, my mom, someone had given it to her, she never read it. Somebody gave it to my sister, she never read it. My sister gives it to me, I read it, I turn around, tell a bunch of people about it. You, another friend, and my sister, and another friend all said, "Oh yeah, I guess I should have read that book." Or, "Oh yeah, I had a copy of that book." "Oh yeah," and it's like it like called it forth again into the consciousness of these women who were like, "Oh yeah, I remembered hearing that was important. Maybe I'll check into it again." And then if you do, it's like, oh well, maybe now is the point in your life where it would be relevant. I mean, because I'm, if I had read it when I was 12, there's a lot I would have gathered from it just because I read stories all the time as a kid, and because I was good with metaphor and poetic imagery. But like, there's a lot of it that just is going to come with age and life experience. And I would have been, oh, well, I can kind of grasp that conceptually, but I don't really know what that means because I'm only 12. You know what I mean? Like, so in that regard, well, I think it's worth pointing out her chapters, even though the whole thing does build on itself in terms of being an exploration of living life as a woman, at the same time, each chapter is kind of tackling its own concept or its own topic. So even if you had the book and you just were like, I don't have time or the wherewithal to read all this right now, but hey, this chapter specifically about, trying to know my tribe or whatever, like fit in, that sounds relevant to me. It's the kind of book where you could skip around in it, and still get something out of it. But when I say that, by skipping around, I would mean chapter section by chapter section. It'd be a lot harder to skip around just like a page here or there or a paragraph here or there.
Right. You want to
all of her stuff is meaty. Yeah.
Yeah. I just feel like I wasn't able to see. That's just to understand. I think I needed more life experiences. I needed to travel down the road a bit. I needed to have some major health crises to kind of take me to where I could understand more. I mean, like literally, I was listening to it at work, and I was just like, just a little, the little abridged version that we've been trying not to be too negative about it. Only having an abridged version. Guys, come on. Okay. Make a longer version. You have to. This is crazy. Maybe there's one out there. That I was just, I was crying. I was just like, oh my gosh, this just So I knew what that meant in my life. And so,
I mean, when you reapproached it?
Yeah.
Now?
When I was listening to it today, it's sort of like I was trying to, it was like I was mimicking. I'm like, okay, like I was mimicking. I'm supposed to read this book. It's important. Like a little kid, with like playing dress up. Like I feel like I was a little bit like that. But because as women, I think a lot of times we don't have anyone to show us anything. Like we are just sort of like stumbling through, and I'm like, I've rejected the archetypes here that you want me to, that you're saying that I should be like, and I'm like, I'm not like that at all. Like I am.
That's because those are all surface level, so some
Right.
part of you knew there was more.
Yeah, exactly. But I didn't know how to get to it, and I'm reading this book about it, but like yet I still could not quite. I was still sort of in that sort of, dress up phase where I'm like, it's a little hard to, I guess, I feel like it's hard to explain how I felt, but I think that's a little closer.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good analogy. And it's kind of that crossover between a little bit from girlhood to womanhood, and what's relevant in that book is more womanhood, and that's just us speaking to life experience again,
Not that you can't read this book before that, which we've been talking about. So you definitely can. And I still think it was important for me to have read it. So what was your biggest takeaway from reading this book? And do you have any good quotes to share?
I think mainly just that I found so much in it that was life affirming to me. Affirming many things that maybe I had always kind of felt or suspected in like my core all my life, but never had been able to put into words. So I think that's maybe kind of like what you were kind of getting at, maybe your younger self didn't have the connection to the words, but now you're like, aha, and I feel like these quotes that I've pulled out do kind of help illustrate it. So I picked a few from throughout the book, but together I picked them because they kind of cohesively build on each other and give a good little sneak preview for any of our listeners here. So bear with us. I think you will really appreciate this. So this first bit is from the introduction, which is titled "Singing Over the Bones." When women reassert their relationship with the wildish nature, they are gifted with a permanent and internal watcher, a knower, a visionary, a oracle, an inspiritus, an intuitive, a maker, a creator, and inventor, and a listener who can guide, suggest, and urge vibrant life in the inner and outer world. When women are with the wild woman, the fact of that relationship glows through them. The wild teacher, wild mother, wild mentor supports their inner and outer lives no matter what. So the word wild here is not used in the modern pejorative sense, meaning out of control, but in its original sense, which means to live a natural life, one in which the creature has innate integrity and healthy boundaries. The words wild and women cause women to remember who they are and what they're about. They create a metaphor to describe the force which funds all females. They personify a force that women cannot live without. From Chapter 1, The Howl, Resurrection of the Wild Woman. We all begin as a bundle of bones lost in a desert, a dismantled skeleton that lies under the sand. It is our work to recover the parts. It is a painstaking process best done when the shadows are just right, for it takes much looking. La Loba, the wolf woman, indicates what we are to look for, the indestructible life force, the bones. This miracle story shows us what can go right for the soul. It is a resurrection story about the underworld connection to Wild Woman, and it promises that if we will sing the song, then we can all call up the psychic remains of our wild woman soul and sing her into a vital shape once again. In this tale, La Loba sings over the bones that she gathers. To sing means to use the soul voice. It means to say on the breath the truth of one's power and one's need, to breathe the soul over the thing that is ailing or in need of restoration. The wild woman archetype funds this layer, emanates the instinctual psyche. Although she can take on many guises in our dreams and creative experiences, she is not from the layer of the mother, the maiden, the menial woman. She's not the inner child. She's not the queen or the Amazon, the lover or the seer. She is just what she is. Call her la que sabe, the one who knows. Call her wild woman. Call her la loba, wolf woman. Call her by her high names or by her low names. Call her by her new names or her ancient ones, and she remains just what she is. Wild woman as an archetype of the inimicable and ineffable force which carries a bounty of ideas and images and particularities for humankind. Archetype exists everywhere, and yet is not seeable in the usual sense. What can be seen of it in the dark cannot be seen in the daylight. We find lingering evidence of archetype in the images and symbols found in stories, literature, poetry, painting, and religion. It would appear that its glow, its voice, and its fragrance are meant to cause us to be raised up from contemplating the shit on our tails to occasionally traveling in the company of the stars. La Loba is the keeper of the soul. Without her, we lose our shape. Without an open supply line to her, humans are said to be soulless or damned souls. She gives shape to the soul house and makes more houses by hand. She is the one in the old apron. She is the one whose dress is longer in the front than the back. She is the one who pat-a-pats. She is the soul maker, the wolf raiser, the keeper of the wild things. So in majestically, be you a black wolf, a northern gray, a southern red, or an arctic white, you are the quintessential instinctual creature. People do meditation to find psychic alignment. That's why people do psychotherapy and analysis. That's why people analyze their dreams and make art. That's why many people read tarot cards or cast I Ching, dance, drum, make theater, cry out a poem, fire up a prayer. That's why we do all the things we do. It is the work of the gathering of all the bones together. Then we must sit at the fire and think about which song we will use to sing over these bones, which creation hymn, which recreation hymn, and the truth that we tell will make this song. These are some of the good questions to ask till one decides on the song, one's own true song. What has happened to my soul voice? What are the buried bones of my life? And what condition is my relationship to the instinctual self? When was the last time I ran free? How do I make life come alive again? Where has La Loba gone? Obviously, a lot of recurring imagery there. All of those bits were actually from different parts of that total chapter, so they flowed together very nicely, but there was a lot of text in between all of those things connecting them and the story from the chapter. But I just thought it was cool how she had those little prompts in there, those questions that are kind of, that one might want to consider asking oneself in terms of, what are the buried bones of my life and that sort of thing. Like, what do you think about that kind of language and imagery in those questions? Like, can you kind of suss out what she's getting to when she says things like, what's the condition of the relationship to the instinctual self? Like, does that resonate to you?
It does. And we were speaking about that life experience, and I talk a lot about this on the podcast, and I hope at some point to go into more detail, but I have irritable bowel syndrome as well as some other chronic illnesses, but that one was the one that really like took me down.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't able to eat, and I lost a lot of weight, and really had to go and live with my parents. So it took me out of my life. Like my regular life was on pause and I was somewhere else. And I feel like literally I had to put myself back together. And so I was asking all of these as I was physically putting myself back together. I was also mentally doing that. And I was asking all of these questions, like I had to take apart what my life was.
You had to reestablish relationship to your instinctual self. It was becoming a matter of survival.
Yeah, exactly. Because I was ignoring that voice. I was ignoring all of that, and it was yelling at me, and I was like, go away. I'm going to have some more chocolate. One of the reasons I gained so much weight in the first place. But so that's what I think about when you read that line. And I feel like in the past, this wouldn't have not made much sense to me. Maybe, but it's about, your relationship to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And
that might be something different in any given moment. They're probably really important questions to just kind of revisit throughout one's life.
Yeah, exactly. To make sure that you are checking in, you're on track. Because it's easy. And I think that, I don't know if everybody else has this. I feel like a lot of people have this tendency to just sort of not listen to themselves, not listen to this voice. And I don't know if it's our culture or what. And so it's easy to go back to that old habit of just sort of ignoring that and working 100 million hours and not taking a vacation. Stuff like that.
Why one of the questions is, when was the last time that you ran free? It's an important one.
Exactly. And it was, like right now, well, I'm in a weird spot, but I am getting outside more now. That's that good. I am working daylight hours. More normal hours. So I get to eat my lunch outside. They have a picnic table under this huge tree.
Nice.
And I just sit and I can look at the mountains because we are up high on like kind of it's got a beautiful vista. So I just sit and that is something that I can do now. So, and then I can go on more walks. So just stuff like that.
Every little thing counts, like she was saying, in terms of finding psychic alignment. That doesn't necessarily mean like precognitive psychic. It means, getting the brain back in balance, and people do that in so many different ways, like she's saying, art and dancing and drumming and even tarot, like whatever tool or outlet can help get you recentered, is a useful one.
It is, because we're just very, I think, in our lives, we're just pulled in many directions, even when we're living maybe a life that's our best life or whatever, that's better for us. I mean, and I know that even you run your own business, and even you are sometimes pulled in many different directions and very, very busy, and it can be challenging to not take on too much stuff, but and to find time to sort of do nothing, and and I actually, this reminds me of something that sort of happened when there was too many things going on in my life, and I wasn't able to listen to that voice, and I made a decision that I probably should have waited on, whereas taking sort of a new job in my I went to a sort of maybe a new position in my company, and I should have sort of waited because I was not in the position to take on all that new stress. And I realized that because I had so much going on, so much noise, and I didn't have any time to just
adjust,
stop any of that or just slow down at all, because there's so many things that were happening.
This next bit I picked out because I felt like you and I both being kind of more wallflower type personalities. This
Me?
Very relevant for us. From chapter 6, Finding One's Pack and Love for the Soul. She says, hold out, hold on, do your work. You will find your own way. At the end of the tale, the swan recognized the duckling as one of their own before he even does. And that's rather typical of the exiled woman. After all the hard wandering, they manage to wander over the frontier into home territory, and they often don't realize that for a time, people's looks have ceased being disparaging, or maybe are just neutral when they're not admiring and approving. And one would think that now that they're in their own sort of psychic ground, they would be deliriously happy, but no. For a time at least, they're terribly distrustful. Do these people really regard me? Am I really safe here? Will I be chased away? Can I really sleep with both my eyes closed now? Is it all right to act like a swan? After a time, suspicions are dropped, and the next stage of coming back to oneself begins acceptance of one's own unique beauty. That is, the wild soul from which we are made. There's probably no better or more reliable measure of whether a woman has spent some time in ugly duckling status at some point or all throughout her life than her inability to digest a sincere compliment. Although it could be a matter of modesty, or it could be attributed to shyness, although too many serious wounds are carelessly written off as nothing but shyness, more often a compliment is stuttered around because it sets up an automatic and unpleasant dialogue in the woman's mind. If you say how lovely she is, or how beautiful her heart is, or compliment anything else her soul took part in, or inspired, or suffused, something in her mind says she's somehow undeserving, and you, the complimenter, must be an idiot for thinking such a thing to begin with, rather than understand that the beauty of her soul shines through when she's being herself. The woman changes the subject and effectively snatches nourishment away from her own soul self, which thrives on being acknowledged. So that is the final work of the exile, who finds her own to not only accept one's own individuality, one's specific identity as a certain kind of person, but also to accept one's beauty and shape of one's soul, and the fact that living close to the wild creature within transforms us and all that it touches. When we accept our own wild beauty, it is put into perspective, and we're no longer poignantly aware of it anymore, but neither would we forsake or disclaim it either. Does a wolf know how beautiful she is when she sleeps? Does the feline know what beautiful shapes she makes when she sits? Is the bird awed by the sound it hears when it snaps open its wings? Learning from them, we just act in our own true way and do not draw back from or hide our natural beauty. Like the creatures, we just are, and it is right. For women, this searching and finding is based on the mysterious passion that women have for what is wild and innately themselves. We've been calling this object of yearning the wild woman, but even when women do not know her name, even when they do not know where she resides, they still strain toward her. They love her with all their hearts. They long for her, and the longing is motivation and locomotion. It is the yearning that causes us to search for the wild woman and to find her. It is not as hard as one might first imagine, for the wild woman is searching for us too, because we are her young. And there's a lot to unpack in that. But I think I can clearly, yes, I have been click, 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 click through all of those stages at some point in my life. You know, yeah.
Yeah. Although she did not mention Ellen's goth stage here, so I think that.
Well, you know, that was sort of quote unquote, well, that was an interesting dynamic because it's like, is it the ugly duckling in the sense of like, well, I don't fit in, but at the same time, it's like, it's part of the search of finding oneself because you're like, well, I'm just gonna make myself be what I want then, and who cares? Fitting in, be damned. So, yeah, well, I mean, teenagers explore all sorts of things, but
they do. Well, some of us. I like to say I've never went through any of that, but maybe I just went through it internally. So, I mean, I don't know. One day I might just be crazy and dye my hair and I don't know, get a bunch of tattoos or something. I mean, tattoos aren't even like rebellious anymore, but yeah, I feel like I am kind of still in that phase. I feel like when you spend such a long time among people who are
you like an ugly duckling.
Yeah, like they don't see how cool you are. They don't support. They don't think they don't really see you.
Yeah.
And
for what you really are. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's odd that you need other people to see you before you see yourself sometimes. But I think it's just from not being supported in a certain way for a lot of your life. Like I mean, I've had very, very supportive parents. I think at some point I just started feeling uncomfortable with, maybe it's a teenage thing. I don't know, like telling them my innermost thoughts, parents, or you just, and then like I never had any real friends that I could say things to, and so yeah, for a long time, people just thought I was very quiet, and I was, because I didn't feel comfortable because of getting kind of whatever social group I was in, kind of getting either shot down or like, not listened to or not felt safe to talk. And so, and also like never really coming out of that. I never really felt like I ever came out of that like teenage phase. And I was never like the cool person, like in my group, like, I mean, we had like a couple of people are like, oh, I wish I was like them. And they were all like skinny and blah, 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 and had all the clothes. And, that, I mean,
typical teenage stuff.
Typical teenage stuff. Yep, me fell into that. So, and they weren't that nice.
Yeah.
Well,
like you said, you go through enough of that, and what enough is going to be different from one person to the next. But if you feel kind of berated or belittled at all, and that's a recurring thing, then yeah, it is going to make it really hard to trust that, am I safe here? Do these people really care? Do they really see me? Is that okay? Like,
right.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say I'm still going through that. Of course, some places aren't safe for you to, say things that, or be a certain way. So there is that, but this is.
Yeah, no, this whole different. Was just more talking about coming into the acceptance when you are finally in a place that's safe and recognizes you and appreciates you, and how hard it can sometimes be to then actually accept. Like, I have a friend who's a really amazing artist, and she's confident in her abilities enough to the point that she used to have a job commercially in drawing, and she's confident enough about it to show people tentatively some of her work, but she doesn't ever think anyone would pay a dime for it. And she doesn't ever think, like, she questions the value all the time. And on the one hand knows that first and foremost, you make art for yourself, like as an expression, whether or not your intention is ever to make it go further than that, it doesn't have to, but it's just a matter of the confidence and feeling safe that, like, yes, this is me, and is it okay to share that, and to trust that I can share it. It's a hard thing, and that was just one example, but I mean, that might come out expressed in other ways with people, maybe not so literal as like sharing art, but like even just sharing a thought, process or feeling, knowing you're in the right group to have it connect and not fall on deaf ears,
Yeah. I think when people are saying, like, you just need to have confidence. And I'm like, well, that does not help me any bit at
It's like,
all.
Well, what is that? What does that look like? What does that mean for me?
How do I develop that confidence if, like, people are always, like, kind of, every time I say something, they're saying it's terrible. Well, then that doesn't instill confidence in myself and my thought process and my ideas. No way.
Right.
So, like, that. But if you have people that are supportive in that way, it does help.
Yeah.
It helps you.
Because it helps you find your own voice.
Yeah.
Voice your own voice.
Yeah, because then you can say things and then sort of test them out, I guess, or sort of, it's a sounding board. It's a good place to, and then when you are in a situation where, like, maybe it's a little different, then you know maybe more about yourself and how maybe you might need to act or something like that. Yep.
Well, this next bit's from Chapter 8, Self-Preservation, Identifying Leg Traps, Cages, and Bait. Through wildlife studies of various species of captive animals, it was found that no matter how lovingly the zoo plazas are constructed, no matter how much the human keepers love them, as indeed many do, creatures often become unable to breed, their appetites for food and rest become skewed, their vital behavior dwindles to lethargy, an untoward aggressiveness. Zoologists call this behavior in captive animals depression. Anytime a creature is caged, its natural cycles of sleep and mate selection, estrus, grooming, parenting, and so forth deteriorate. As the natural cycles are lost, emptying follows. The emptiness, if not full, is not full, like the Buddhist concept of the sacred void, but rather it's empty like being inside a sealed box with no windows. So too, when a woman enters a household of a dry old woman, she might experience the lack of resolve, the miasma, simple depressions and sudden anxiety states that are similar to the symptoms that animals display when they've been stunned by capture and trauma. Too much domestication breeds out the strong and basic impulse to play, to relate and rove, commune, and so forth. When a woman agrees to become well-bred, her instincts for these impulses drop down to a dark unconscious outside of her automatic reach. She is said then to be instinct injured. What should come naturally comes not at all, or after too much tugging and pulling and rationalizing and fighting with herself. When I speak of over-domestication as capture, I do not refer to socialization, the process whereby children are taught to behave in more or less civilized ways. Social development is critical and important. Without it, a woman cannot make her way in the world. But too much domestication is like forbidding the vital essence to dance. In its proper and healthy state, the wild self is not docile or vacuous. It is alert and responsive to any given movement or moment. It is not locked into an absolute repetitive pattern, for any and all circumstances. It's a creative choice. The instinct-injured woman has no choice. She is stuck. There are many ways to be stuck. The instinct-injured woman usually gives herself away because she has a difficult time asking for help, recognizing her own needs. Her natural instinct to flight were drastically slowed or extinct. Recognition of the sensations of satiation, of taste, suspicion, caution, and the drive to love fully and freely are now inhibited or exaggerated. So that's some pretty heavy stuff there. And, you know, it's really important to kind of think of that analogy, since she's using a sort of, you know, the wild terminology, you know, bring it down to a relatable level of comparing it to, you know, a captured animal in a cage and what that does, you know. So capture, you know, for somebody might be, you know, being in a bad relationship, in a horrible job, or some kind of mental stigma, or physical stigma and things like that, to create that stuckness somehow, you know, that sense of being stuck. Sometimes not even being aware of that one is stuck, you know.
Yeah, like it's just a situation that you feel like you don't have any control over, which happens a lot in life, like, or just being like, I don't know, very poor, having an illness as well. Just
oh yeah, that would be.
And if you spend a lot of time there, you get kind of used to it. You, like you said, you don't even realize that maybe you're stuck anymore, or how you're stuck, and you don't realize
being instinct injured, you know, like your own instincts aren't even working right anymore.
Like when I wasn't listening to myself, you know, through therapy, I had to learn how to talk to myself, and it was really hard. You know, she was like, "How do you feel?" And I'm like, "I don't feel. I don't know. I don't know how I feel." Because I mean, I still struggle with just sort of like, you just sort of like, well, I kind of, I don't know, I'm tired. Is that a feeling?
Finding the words to encapsulate
I don't have
more depth to what's going on.
Yeah, I have it in another book, but she gave me these lists of feelings, like you have the like this, the basic, like sad, mad, glad, scared, and then all the other feelings like are just sort of just variations of that, or shades of that. It's been 3 years, I'm still doing that. I'm still like.
Do you feel like it's helped you be less stuck?
Yes, I do.
I know I'm guilty of, and this I think falls in the realm of a lot of people who are helper and healer type personalities, but the struggle to know when and how to ask for help for yourself, you know? Yeah. It's like if you're so used to always being strong for other people, it's harder to know how to receive that from anyone else. You know, even when you might be smart enough to know you need it, ask is half the battle.
It is.
It's a good majority of the battle, honestly.
It is, and like, I think the larger culture doesn't encourage that either, so it's doubly hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That was one of my issues too. Yeah, it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to learn. It's a hard thing to know when you're doing it. I mean, I still catch myself. I still fall into that. It's just sort of a habit. Habits are hard to break. So you have to work every day at it. And I was kind of like, this thing at work, I was like, man, I wasn't doing my things that I needed to do if I had the time and the processing, you know, like that. And so I sort of fell back where, like, oh yeah, I'm fine, I can handle it. And then no, I needed to step back.
Next bit I pulled out of that same chapter, but I thought it was so important because this is something, if you think about it, you know you've encountered it. You might have done it yourself in your life, and if not, you know you've observed it in other people. And honestly, it goes beyond women. I mean, everybody does this to some extent. The sort of masking almost, you know, like here's you when you're in this situation, and here's when you're in this situation. But the real me is just gonna get these little, you know, tidbits here and there. So she says, you can call it anything you like, but sneaking a life because the real one is not given room enough to thrive is hard on a woman's vitality. Captured and starved women sneak all kinds of things. They sneak unsanctioned books or music. They sneak friendships or sexual feelings, religious affiliations. They sneak furtive thinking, dreams of revolution. They sneak time away from their mates and their families. They sneak treasure into the house. They sneak their writing time or their thinking time or their soul time. They sneak a spirit into the bedroom, a poem before work. They sneak in a skip or an embrace when no one's looking. Woman has to surrender the pretense. Sneaking a counterfeit soul life never works. It always blows out the sidewall when you're least expecting it. And then it's misery all around. It's better to get up, stand up, no matter how homemade your platform is, and live the most that you can, the best that you can, and forego the sneaking around of counterfeits. Hold out for what has real meaning in health for you. It's difficult to sneak little shreds of life this way, but women do it every day. When a woman feels compelled to sneak a life, she is in minimal subsistence mode. She sneaks life away from the hearing of them, whoever them is in her life. She acts disinterested and calm on the surface, maybe, but whenever there's a crack of light, her starved self leaps out, runs for the nearest life form, lights up, kicks back, charges madly, dances her silly self, exhausts herself, and then tries to creep back to the black cell before anybody noticed she was gone. Women in poor marriages do this. Women made to feel inferior do this. Women filled with shame or fear of punishment, ridicule, or humiliation do this. Instinct-injured women do this. Sneaking is good for captured women only if she sneaks the right thing, only if it can lead to her liberation. In essence, sneaking the good and filling and brave pieces of life causes the soul to be even more determined that the sneaking needs to stop, and that it has to be free to lead life out in the open as it sees fit. You see, there's something in the wild soul that will just not let us subsist forever on piecemeal intakes. Because in actuality, it's impossible for women who strive for consciousness to sneak sniffs of good air and then be content with no more. Remember when you were a child and you found out that you couldn't do yourself in by holding your breath?
No.
Do as you might try to get by on just as little air or no air. Some big fist bellows would take over. Something fierce and demanding would eventually make you shovel the air in as fast as you can. You gulp it, you bite it down until you're breathing fully again. Blessedly, there is something like that within our soul and our psyche as well. It takes us over and it forces us to take in full breaths of good air. Truly, we know that we cannot subsist on sneaking little sips at life. The wild force and woman's soul demands that she have access to it all. We can stay alert and take in things that are right for us. So I thought that was a good wrapping up the quotes note, because it's like even in these hard moments and ways that we might struggle to create a life for ourselves the way, you know, in the image we want it to be, to keep that conscious thought about that allows us to try to direct it and get closer to what we really want it to be, and choosing, like she said, what's right for us or what's best for our health and so forth. You know, sometimes we might be in life situations where sneaking a little bit of something that makes you feel more alive is all you can do, and it's better to have that than nothing. But just so long as it's the motivating factor to keep you reaching for more and more until you can kind of open more doors for yourself.
I think every time I've tried to sort of live, or I've been in a situation where like it's just I'm maybe not being where I want to be or where I need to be or where I know that I should be. Yeah, it just sort of like kind of crumbles in very dramatic ways, and then I get shot out onto a course correction, like either usually like a romantic breakup, or I guess a health crisis. It's just like, hey, you're on the wrong road. You're not doing the things that you need to do to make you. You're not doing the things you need to do.
Yeah.
You're just, or I don't even know if I was sneaking anything. I mean, maybe.
No, but it's like, the subconscious level.
Oh yeah.
It's just like the soul knows.
I mean, maybe grilled cheese sandwiches. Those were really good. So, but I feel like it makes me think about like when it's just things that you feel like you can't do or you shouldn't do, but the things that you definitely should do, or things that you feel like are wrong, like my current tarot and oracle card collection, which you cannot see behind me and over here, getting crazy. I just need a bookcase. I swear that's all I need. But that happened. That's something I wanted to do, and like I tried to start doing that in college, and I just could not step into that when I was in Texas with my parents, and I was, going through this process. I was like, well, it's time we need to do this. This is what we should do, and maybe it's not about. I wasn't like necessarily sneaking, but I didn't. Like, I didn't hide them. I couldn't hide anything from my parents in Texas. So I think if I had been younger, I would have been like hiding them under the bed, or just like, don't tell mom I'm doing tarot. But she's fine with it. Like, she's not like, she doesn't think it's the devil. Some people do, but
well, and I don't even know that she was. I mean, yeah, it could be literal sneaking, but I think she also means metaphorical in the sense of you didn't, even when you were interested in it in the past, you didn't allow yourself to really delve in and fully explore. Right. So in a way, cracking that back open was like, you were sneaking a little bit for yourself. But then, thankfully, you didn't just keep sneaking it. You were like, nope, this is part of me. This is what I like. This is what I'm doing. Here it is. Voila. And now you have a bookshelf worth of tarot cards. That was because you embraced it and you didn't sneak,
And I actually have a defunct treadmill full of tarot cards.
Too bad it's a defunct treadmill, because otherwise you could maybe invent a new way of reading tarot. Just lay the cards on it and turn it on and then see where they go. Whatever lands face up where you can read it.
Well, maybe I'll try that with the new one when we get it. That's definitely what I was trying to express, was that when you were reading that, that's what I feel like my experience fits that bit the closest, or makes me think about that. But there's and then there's one more that like I always wanted to do, that like it's on my list, and I'm like, I'm gonna do this, like I think it gets easier as you do them, as you bring the stuff that you like, and you stop out into the light, and you stop sneaking.
Trying to think of examples, I guess probably the one that jumps out to me is when she said a poem before work. Writing has been something that I have turned to before as a way to deal with or try to process whatever's going on around me or in my life. And sometimes it has felt like that, where it's just like being in the right place that I want to be, or in the right feelings. I just have to, if I could just get this little bit out, then there's like that tiny little glimmer of who I am at my core, trying to peek out through the paper and the pen. And that's just enough, that it would get me by until things changed or improved or whatever. So that would be more of an example of, I guess, where she was saying that the sneaking could be useful if it's a guide to lessen the sneaking overall, which it was. Thankfully, I've been fortunate to navigate that pretty well, as opposed to doing the opposite, which she says, which is kind of being more of the counterfeit soul. And I feel like that's kind of what I meant when I was saying you've met people like that, everybody has, people who are just have too much of a mask on.
Yeah.
But it's almost like they're masked to themselves,
Oh, definitely. And it's sad, and wish that I could help that person somehow. And it's so obvious. But I don't think it's obvious to them at all. I feel like in some ways she's not even talking about us. She's talking about even more women in more severe situations.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, a really good example would be anybody who, was feeling that they were closeted and couldn't come out due to fear of, what that might, what kind of retaliation that might spark in their church or their community or their family, or whatever. That's a big example of somebody having to find ways to sneak about what their inner self is. Again, ultimately, it's just talking about trying to get the outer self to align with and reflect the inner self, instead of having to keep it locked up, or disconnected.
There's a Sandra Bullock movie where she goes to rehab, and it was actually filmed around here. And I can't remember the name of it, but there's this bit with a horse, and she's supposed to have her insides match her outsides. And it's like horse therapy, because they're in rehab, they're like alcoholics and toe poppers and stuff like that. And she's supposed to like reach down to the horse's hoof and like pull up, lift up, have the horse, or her and the horse, like lift up its leg or something, like have it lift up its foot. And apparently like the horse won't do that unless you are like have your insides match your outsides or something like that. And that just, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the title, but that's what I thought about.
That's actually a good example, because I've good fortune to get an opportunity to do some natural horsemanship, and it blows my mind. Like, those animals are so quickly able to be in tune with you, and they read every ounce of body language that you don't even know you're giving off. So if you aren't extremely mindful about what you're wanting them to do and what your intention is, like, they can easily, just blow you off, like they're just like, why should I listen to you? And then all of a sudden, when you are cued in, they're like, oh, okay, well, I'll do this thing that you want me to do, without having to use a whip, without having to use any kind of forceful direction. It's all 100% body language and how how your demeanor is, and a lot of it is about being centered and grounded and finding some confidence. It's pretty amazing. That's funny that they put that in that movie, and sounds like they captured it appropriately.
They did. You know what? It's not a terrible movie. It's a good movie. It's it's a comedy. Of course, it's dealing with a serious subject, but I don't know. I thought they did a pretty okay job. Who would you recommend this book for?
Women. I really recommend, honestly, anyone curious about it, give it a try, because I don't think you have to have any huge understanding of mythology or psychology to appreciate it. I don't consider myself anywhere near an expert on those topics, and I still got a lot out of the book. I think the author's intention was to make it as accessible as possible while still being her own sort of project and style. People who might have trouble picking up on and understanding metaphor or more imaginative thinking or people who don't have appreciation for folktales and poetry, or maybe don't like doing self-analysis, or maybe if you're not very good at osmosis through observation of life around you, then okay, you might struggle through the book a little bit because it will sound like some jumbled jargon or nonsense. Basically, if all those quotes that I've pulled from the book leave you scratching your head, maybe this isn't the right time in your life to attempt the book because it's headier from there. The book kind of dances, though, between the left and the right brain. Like it's got its more rational, calculating, and discerning side, but it's also got a lot of whimsy and its feeling and sensing side, and a sense of play, through exploring the folk tales and stuff. So if you tend to lean hard in either one direction, then you might misinterpret half the book. But if you can feel like you can straddle those two sides of your brain, or you want to try, or it sounds enticing and exciting, then yeah, definitely give it a try. And I don't even think, you don't have to be a woman. I think if you're open-minded enough, you'll find useful human relevant knowledge within it, regardless of gender identity.
Everybody needs to know about each gender, or all of them. It's a
community to help with improved communication. I mean, there are parts of it where I read it and I thought, it might be useful to get my husband to read this book, and not because he's like ignorant in any particular way, but just that because she has such a distinct way of explaining things that I wouldn't have thought to put it that way. But once I read it, I'm like, oh yeah, that really resonates. Passing it along to your life partner could help with communication and understanding both ways.
While we were talking about it, it reminded me of the feminine mystique, just in the fact that like it's a book for women, but she also wrote a book about men.
Oh.
And I don't think a lot of people know that. And it was really good. And I think it was I read that one a while ago as well. It's somewhere. It's probably in a box. I think it was doing something similar, talking about the role of men in society, that with these books, it's good to not leave out the boys. And then they also need books for them. And I think that's still a lacking space. So as we had discussed earlier, that this book, or written for the book written for all the genders, more inclusive. That's probably,
which, I'm sure they exist. They're out there. I was more just lamenting because I loved her work so much and her writing style so much that I'm like, oh, it'd be cool if she would do that.
Maybe she will. I don't know. That would be cool. I'd read that one. I want to know some more. Maybe. My brain already just runs away with itself, so maybe it doesn't need any more information. No, just kidding. All right, guys. So I want to thank you for joining us on this discussion of Women Who Run with the Wolves. And we could probably have like 6 podcasts about it because there's so much in it.
Yeah, you don't need to hear us. Just go read the book.
Yeah, that's true. We talked enough. The book speaks for itself. But we still could speak more. We are, instead of having 3 podcasts a month, we are going down to 2 podcasts a month. So the podcast will release on the 2nd and 4th Wednesday of every month. Next time, we do not know yet who our guest is going to be. So
stay tuned. It'll be a surprise.
Yes, even to us. So we won't have any new shows in July. So just a heads up about that. Please follow us on YouTube, and you can listen to us on Anchor or Spotify. And we have a Facebook group and an Instagram, and all those links will be in the description. So please check us out. Also, if you'd like to support the show with your monies and help us to take the show on the road, we are pretty much all vaccinated now from the COVID, so that may be happening sooner than later. You can go to Anchor, and then there's a support button, and you can donate for $1, $5, or $10 a month, and we appreciate it. So, all right. Well, we will catch you guys next time.
Thanks for listening, everyone.